Hi, we're Team Alpha, and I will be taking you through the Spiral model as a system development life cycle. Spiral model was introduced in Barry Bowen's book in 1986, and Spiral model is one of the oldest development models to have approached and proposed an iterative software building process. It's a mix of waterfall and iterative development process. Spiral model is also called the meta model because it subsumes all other SDLC models in itself. Barry Bonham makes us understand that building software iteratively leads to easier management of risk. Myself and my team will be taking you through the four process of the spiral model that it engulfs. And those four processes have been identified and will be stated out in the quadrant here below. Those processes being phase one, which is the planning process, phase two, which is the risk analysis process, phase three, which is the development and engineering, and phase four, which is the evaluation and review. Thank you very much. I'll be back
Hello,
to take you through.
my name is Rankit and I will be taking further you into a spiral model. The development approach was a mix of a waterfall and an iterative model. The basic theme of this model was to make a software that will help us to identify as well as the easier management of the risk. If we were to visualize this on a straight line, then it will fall into a series of a waterfall model. As the spiral model works, building progressively a software that will be forward making into a completion version, and that will help us to modify the risk. So over here, it starts from the center point of the loops and works outward side. In this phase, there is a customer feedbacks also take place, as well as the customer evaluates what are the modification to be done, and those modifications are implemented. Then there's also a phase that's known as a risk analysis. If the risks are quite high in this phase, the project is terminated. So this spiral model can be classified into four phases, that is planning, risk analysis, and the further two phases will be discussed by my friend. So I will be talking about the planning phase. That's the first phase. In this planning phase, it is basically we are doing a planning. The planning includes identification of the stakeholders, risk analysis, as well as the requirement analysis. Over we look about the objectives of the life cycle and what will be the outcome. Also, we will be gathering a success rate, and if the success rates are not high, we will be adding something additionally to make it high. Then comes the second phase, that is a risk analysis phase. Risk analysis phase, we look about the risk related activities such as risk identification and risk prioritization and risk mitigation. This is a phase when we use to build a prototype, and we use that prototype to deal with the risk. So basically we mitigate the risk by building a software that helps us to overcome those risks, as well as over here we build a second prototypes which will be act as a demo prototypes. That is a prototype 1, prototype 2, and after that we will make a final prototype which is an operational prototype or a release candidate. If the prototypes are okay, then we will be further going to a next phase, and that will be continued by my friend Navdeep. Thank you.
As my colleagues just explained to you, the first and the second phases, I'll be walking you through the third and the fourth phase. The third phase that we encounter after the risk analysis is engineering phase. In engineering, what we do is the prototype that we build, we work more on it, and we develop a model that does the same function, but in some lesser capacity. So in the evaluation phase, we could take the model that we have developed in the engineering phase and ask the client that we have how it holds up to their expectation. And we do as we are in a spiral model, and this is an iterative model, we do this again and again. Just after the evaluation, we go in again into the planning phase, and in the planning we check whether the last model that we made was how it fared to the opinion of the client. and then we again go into the risk analysis, and we come back into the engineering. We go. There is no limit as to how many loops we can have in this model. So this can go on as long as the client is happy and the whole expenditure does not exceed their expectations. But in the last phase, then when we have the last loop, what we can see right here, we have an operational prototype. We just add on the functions to it, and the steps that follow are just like a waterfall model. We design it, we code it, we integrate it, test it, and then implement it. And if the client is happy, we can release the model. We need not go into the evaluation phase for that. So as you can see, the bigger the loop gets right here, the more time it is taking, and the more time and money it is being spent on the whole project. So as spiral model is an iterative model, and we go through the risk analysis again and again. So whenever the client feels that the money being spent on it is too much, the model can be stopped then and there itself. Otherwise, we have a working model after each prototype, so that also helps the client to realize what he actually wants in the project. That's all. Thank you.
Taking you through the critical review. Spiral model has informed us that system development is inherently an iterative process. Each of the 4 phases and this quadrant requires a high level of commitment for development completion. As seen in the diagram, each loop transitions to the next, and at every loop, risk analysis is taken. The major distinguishing feature of the spiral model is its risk-driven approach rather than documents or code-driven process. Also, the spiral model extensively uses prototype, and prototyping helps lead to risk mitigation. By risk mitigation in the risk analysis process, a high level of expertise is needed to mitigate and analyze risk to avoid project failure. Because prototyping is used extensively as well, there is a customer satisfaction because it brings about interaction between the developers and customer, provide feedback and review. And because prototyping is used extensively as well, the system is built in its early life. By so doing, it leads to an operational prototype which falls into the development cycle of the classical waterfall model, which is represented here as programming, integration, and delivery. Also, because prototype is used extensively, risk is analyzed, mitigated, and avoidance of project failure is done. Also, the width of this project is indicated here, which is the accumulative cost that is represented by every of the loop.
So guys, I will be talking about idle uses. What are the idle uses of this spiral model? So it is used when we are going to evaluate what's the risk and what are the cost. So it is used for medium to high risk projects, and for the good, it is also good for large and mission oriented projects. It is suitable for high risk projects where the business needs are daily changes, as we can make changes overall to the project initially, and when the requirements are a bit complex, because this can easily handle the complex requirements, and significant changes are expected, as in the business era we have to do a daily updations, so research can be daily updated, and when the cost and the risk evaluation is necessarily important, because the whole model specifies what are the cost factors that is must in the business era, as well as what are the risk analysis. The whole risk analysis speaks for the risk. Thank you.
Now we'll be going ahead with the advantages and disadvantages of the model. Firstly, we like to go through the advantages of the model. Since we have a lot of emphasis on the risk analysis part, like we have a separate sector for it, so the risks are highly avoided, and that reduces the overall cost of the project. We have a lot of we spend a lot of time in planning as well. So we have a strong approval and documentation control for the project. Software is produced early on in the project because we build prototypes and then we engineer on them to like evaluate them later on. So so software is developed early on in the project itself. We don't need to wait all the while. It's a even like we are developing model again and again, and then we are evaluating it. So the software that we develop is highly customized as per the need of the client, even if they don't know in the very beginning. Now I like to point some of the disadvantages of the product, because we spend a lot of resources and a lot of time in it. So it's a costly model to use. Since it's costly and it's quite extensive, so it's not advisable to use it on smaller projects and so on. If the people involved are not conscious about it, the spiral can even go on forever. Also, since we put a lot of emphasis on the risk analysis part, and risk analysis is something that needs a specific expertise in it, so we need special experts who could run us through the whole process involved in this. And also the project model can be a little expensive to use. That's it. Thank you. So in the end, we would like to conclude by saying the model has its fair share of advantages and disadvantages, but
It can still be used in the software development, even though it is more than a 30 years old model.
Yeah, without our Spira model, we wouldn't have practices which we see today in common places. Models like Agile and Lean, they have their roots and approaches tied to the Spira model as well.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.